Okay, we're going to be talking about three finishes that span the test of time or history. One of them being shellac, an all-natural product. Another being lacquer, very common in the professional space. And the third one being polyurethane, one you might have heard of and a very common finisher of today's era. We're going to talk through which one to use at each circumstance, which one you might want to use on your upcoming wood finishing project. As always, if you like what you're seeing, please hit that like button and subscribe so you can follow along on our future videos. Okay, let's go ahead and get to it.
Today we're going to take a look at three different finishes that are somewhat similar, but really we're going to find as we delve into it that they're significantly different and can be used in different ways for different results. And I'm going to start and move from the oldest finish, historically oldest finish, to the historically newest finish. And the oldest one is this shellac. Shellac is made by insects. It is a secretion of the lac bug, which lives in certain trees in southern Asia and India, and they secrete this fluid. And this fluid is harvested, and then it is dried, and then the dried shellac is cracked and crumbled into a flaky sort of solid. You then mix these flakes with the solvent for shellac, which is denatured alcohol. Now, denatured alcohol is alcohol that you could drink, but they've made it poisonous so that people don't drink it. So it's the same alcohol, it just has a poison added to it. It's called denatured alcohol. It's inexpensive, as it's somewhat obnoxious in fumes, but not real bad. It's interesting to know that nature is required to make this shellac. This is 16 ounces of shellac flakes, and it took about 1.5 million lac bugs to make this 1 pound of shellac. So there's a lot of nature going on here to make it, but it's very natural. There's nothing man-made about it. It was the go-to furniture finish from starting in about 1820, and it was the go-to finish until about 1920, 100 years. Virtually all the furniture made in Europe and the United States were finished with shellac. Then nitrocellulose lacquer was invented, discovered as a result of World War I, and it became the go-to finish. And in fact, in those days, they thought that shellac was dead and would never be used again because lacquer seemed like the perfect finish. But then in the 1940s, some chemists came up with polyurethane. And polyurethane, we'll see, has some real advantages over these other two finishes, and it has one or two detrimental characteristics, and we'll talk about all that. So now let's talk about, we've seen sort of the history of it, let's talk about the characteristics. Shellac, like I said, you mix these flakes with denatured alcohol, and the quantity gives you a different characteristic in the finish. That is, the amount of the solid that you add to a given amount of denatured alcohol determines some of the characteristics of the finish. It can be either sprayed on or brushed on. If you brush on shellac, it's not like painting where you take a brush and go back and forth. The shellac sort of dries pretty quickly, and so you need to keep your brush moving in the direction of the wet edge. You don't want to go back, you always want to go forward. It's because if you do go back and then forward, you end up dragging some partially cured and dried shellac into the newly wet finish, and it doesn't give you an attractive finish. So putting it on requires a bit of skill and some getting used to. I would say it's more you have to get used to it than it's a real high skill endeavor. Now, lacquer, you can also spray on shellac, and to spray it on in a modern sprayer, HLVP sprayer, you just mix it and to the right consistency, because this dissolves completely in the denatured alcohol, and then you can spray it. It sprays very well. It does not dry exceedingly rapidly, but it dries fast enough that the spray process works and you don't get a bunch of settling of dirt and dust and so forth into the finish. Lacquer, the reason lacquer is so wonderful in the furniture business is how quickly it goes on. The furniture business sprays the lacquer with professional sprayers. HVLP would work fine for the home user, and you mix it with lacquer thinner to the proper consistency to get the proper viscosity to go through the sprayer and atomize correctly coming out of the sprayer. The thing about lacquer is, though, you have to spray it in an even pattern and you have to move rather rapidly. The lacquer will basically dry as soon as it hits the surface. And so there is definitely some learning curve to get used to so that you don't end up with orange peel-like finish in the lacquer. So it takes a good sprayer and it takes some practice to get used to. To overcome some of that, these sprayers can be a bit pricey. They also make spray cans of lacquer, which you can buy at the big box home goods store. And you can spray it on without having any of the expensive equipment. The problem is that the lacquer per ounce that's in those spray cans is fairly expensive compared to buying what you would put into your own sprayer. So you have an initial cost of buying the spraying equipment, but then it's cheaper to use the lacquer. You also can buy a brush on lacquer, and you'll notice there's a paintbrush on the label here with a guy's hand. This is a brushing lacquer. You can brush lacquer on. The problem with brushing it on is that you have to keep a wet edge, and you really have to keep a wet edge because it dries very rapidly. So if you're trying to do a very large surface, even the area of this table saw top surface would be difficult to do with a brushing lacquer because it would dry so quickly that as you got back to where you were on the last pass, it could very well have dried to the point where there's a seam and a line. Now polyurethane is, you do not typically spray polyurethane on. It doesn't spray particularly well. You generally brush it on or wipe it on. The most difficult thing about polyurethane is learning the technique to get a good looking finish. You don't want to leave a lot of brush marks behind, so you have to use a high quality brush with very fine bristles, and you have to put it on delicately and without a lot of pressure and without a lot of repeated brushing. As far as durability is concerned, the shellac is the least durable. It's most susceptible to water and heat, to being damaged by, for instance, if you have a glass of water with ice in it and you set it down on a shellac surface, it will leave a white ring, and that white ring will be there. So you have to use coasters, for instance, and you can't put anything hot on shellac. Lacquer is a more durable finish than shellac. It's, I would say, a medium durability. Again, you don't want to set hot things onto lacquer, and you don't really want to have water sitting on it for long periods of time. And you particularly don't want to have an alcoholic drink spill on it and stay there, because the alcohol will react with it. By far, the most durable of these three finishes is the polyurethane. It's a very modern finish in that it is designed to be durable. Now let's talk about some of the character. And putting it on, as I said earlier, is a little bit, it takes some technique, but it goes on reasonably well. This one, you're smelling denatured alcohol, and you clean your brushes in denatured alcohol. This one, you actually need respiratory equipment to keep from breathing the lacquer, and it is a safety hazard. It's especially flammable, and you wouldn't want to have it in an enclosed space with, say, a water heater with a pilot light or a furnace with a pilot light, because you get a large enough buildup of the fumes that it can become explosive and actually blow up. Polyurethane is an oil-based finish, and it does smell like an oil-based finish, but it's not so bad that it's not toxic enough that you would need to use respiratory equipment if you're going to use the polyurethane. So to sum up, the shellac has been around for a long time. It's inexpensive. It's fairly easy to put on, but its durability is really not up to a modern finish. Lacquer is very quick to put on, hence it is used a lot in the furniture industry. It dries very quickly. That's both a benefit and a drawback if you're not good at putting it on. So you have to have a good technique to put lacquer on. And lacquer is dangerous. It's dangerous from a toxic fume perspective, and it's explosive. So you have to be very careful and work in ventilated spaces away from open flames. Polyurethane is by far the most durable. It's pretty easy to put on. It dries relatively quickly, and you can brush it on or wipe it on. So we hope you enjoyed the content that we've given you today. Please hit the like button and please subscribe so that you can be notified of future content that we put out.